Hi, I'm Finn, and I am an artist. I have always been an artist, and I will always be an artist. My Greenstone is a journey about sharing art with people to spark passion. Through this, the idea Canvas of Hope was born. The reason that I chose art to be the basis for my Greenstone is because art has been the one consistent thing in my life since I was first able to put pencil to paper. It never mattered what the subject was, the inspiration, or the medium. I was driven to try and learn new forms and mediums, which quickly sparked a lifetime passion for it. Since then, I've been expanding into as many different areas of art as possible. Learning drawing techniques took me from scribbly doodles in my school workbooks to creating full-scale, in-depth drawings. From there, I started exploring more. I started trying out other different methods, such as screen printing, tattooing, wood carving, forging, and so on. This year, I had the opportunity to work with a Bali-based artist named Jamie, who brought me on the build team for his upcoming sculpture. What an amazing experience. We spent months and months working on this piece. Any available moment that I would spend in the studio, learning, absorbing, and applying every step of the process. When it was finally completed, Jamie had it installed at New Wanu, where it is now on public display. After Jamie's piece was completed, I knew that it was time to focus on something entirely on my own. I poured months of work into my first ever bronze wall piece. I spent my time experimenting, adjusting, and slowly building something that I felt proud of. When that was finally finished, it made its first appearance at the compound for an exhibition in March, a moment that felt like a real milestone in my journey as an artist. While my passion for art has always grown and expanded, there has always been a little voice in the back of my mind. Not one of encouragement, not one of inspiration, but one that consistently reminds me that these opportunities are available to me because of my privilege. I have lived a life blessed with opportunities. I have lived a life full of support, something that not everybody in this world can say that they have experienced. Recognizing this pushed me to think more deeply about what I could do to give back through my project. I knew that I wanted my Greenstone to be more than just a showcase of skill. I wanted it to serve a purpose. This was my call to action. But how do I connect that with art? I wanted to do something that was original, but at the same time could create a direct impact. To do this, I started thinking about the same question. How did my own journey begin? That's when the idea clicked. If I could find people who hadn't had the chance to experience art the way that I had, then maybe I could help spark that same fiery, creative fire in somebody else. To do this, I started researching different places and people who didn't have access to the same tools and teachers that I was able to learn art from. I started visiting different learning centers, local schools, and foundations, looking for a place that didn't have an already existing art program. The problem I ran into is that they all already had some form of existing art program. I started to think that I was looking for something that didn't exist. Everywhere I looked was already teaching art in some way, so maybe there wasn't a need for me to teach it. I started to think that my only option was to change Greenstones and work on something that I didn't find as meaningful. Just as hope was dwindling, a friend of mine reached out who works at Ragam Kitchen, which is a charity which provides food for those in need. He told me about a place that was looking to have someone come in and teach art. And with his help, we set up a meeting and a tour with the owner of a foundation in Denpasar. This was where I was introduced to YPK. YPK is a nonprofit organization based in Denpasar, which specializes in supporting people living with disabilities. YPK has been helping rehabilitate people for over 20 years and has an overall goal of assisting people to become independent. Indonesia has not always been known for accepting people living with disabilities. This leads to children at a young age being mistreated and not cared for properly. Imagine having your own family turn their back on you and look at you as less than a person because of reasons completely out of your control. This must be one of the worst feelings imaginable. Enough is enough. This is why the critical work that YPK carries out is so vital to creating a more accepting culture and ensuring that anyone living with disabilities is treated with the same dignity as everybody in this room. Now, when I first arrived at YPK, I'll admit I was a little skeptical. Seeing some of the children and the physical challenges they faced, I began wondering how much we'd realistically be able to accomplish if we were to do art lessons there. However, when I stepped into the first classroom, all that doubt washed away. I saw a kid named Risky, who was drawing by himself at one of the tables. When I walked over to check out what he was making, I was blown away to see a highly detailed sketch that he had been making. I started chatting with him and was surprised by how quickly we connected over shared interests. I knew that this is the place to do my Greenstone. So I immediately started talking with the owner of YPK about setting up a long-term plan. I eventually committed to teaching an art lesson every Friday morning each week. I dove into researching, trying to find different lessons that could be done by anyone, keeping in mind the lack of motor function that many of these children struggled with. From there, I started diving into YouTube tutorials, books, and articles, and eventually came up with a couple pretty good options that I could try out. When I first sat down for that first lesson, the word nervous was an understatement for how I was feeling. I had no idea what to expect, and I didn't even know if these kids were going to be interested in what I had to teach. My lack of fluency in Indonesian also made me doubt how well I would be able to explain the lesson. Thankfully, the lesson went pretty well. Thank you. We had a great day doing some painting activities, and the staff that were there were happy to translate anything that wasn't understood. From then on, the lessons would get easier and easier over time. I started to think that it was becoming smooth sailing. I would leave every Friday morning in a great mood, already thinking and planning about the next lesson. However, as the lessons went on, I started to have a thought in the back of my mind. What would happen once I graduate and leave Bali? Would these lessons just stop and cease to exist? I didn't want my project to become one of those one-offs, which end as soon as the student graduates and leaves Bali. I wanted to have a lasting impact, something that could continue even after I left Bali. To do this, I started brainstorming on different ways to keep art within the curriculum. I started wondering if I needed to find teachers who could come in and consistently give their time to continue running the classes. However, I realized that was very unrealistic for people to continuously do consistently out of their free time. Eventually, I realized that all of the teachers who were there at YPK were following along with my lessons and had already been teaching lessons themselves. After talking with them, I quickly realized that they would continue running classes even after I left, so long as that they had the resources for materials and the confidence to come up with their own ideas. So, with this new goal in mind, I set up a fundraiser to cover the art supplies for the foreseeable future. Initially, I was very unsure if we'd be able to reach the goal, as I thought it was quite high. However, the support was overwhelming. We actually surpassed it. I'm incredibly thankful to everybody who helped and donated. With the funding secured, I could shift my focus back onto the lessons. However, as time went on, it started to become increasingly difficult to come up with fresh new ideas for lessons that we hadn't already tried. I was still eager to explore as many different forms and mediums of art as possible. However, designing lessons that could be done by everybody in the class proved to be more challenging than I thought it would be. Around this time, I connected with an art therapist named Natalia, who gave me fresh insight into new creative approaches I hadn't considered before. I learned that sometimes it's better to give more freedom with the lessons instead of telling them exactly how to do something. If I gave them the freedom, the materials, but then also the freedom to take their own direction with the class, then maybe I could see an increase in interest. When I put this to practice and tried it out, I saw a massive increase in interest from many of the kids who were not originally as motivated. Something else that I observed, To see them learn these new skills, even when they originally were not as motivated, was incredibly rewarding. Something else that I observed was that with a lot of the difficult parts, they were having them done by the staff first before trying it themselves. Now, I understood this, but at the same time, I wanted to see them push themselves to try and work through these hard parts independently. So when I tried this, of asking them to work through these difficulties, I saw multiple kids succeed, even when they initially thought they wouldn't be able to. To see them learn these new skills and work through these difficulties, even with their original self-doubt, was also incredibly rewarding. As time went by, after over a year of teaching, the time for the final lesson slowly started to creep up. I knew that I wanted to do a big final project as a final send-off for all of the children I had been working with. However, I wasn't sure on what to do. After a long time thinking, I eventually ended up landing on doing a big collaborative art piece with all of the students and staff who were there. When I was finally sitting there in the art lesson, I wasn't able to fully grasp that this may be the last time I saw many of the kids' faces. I wasn't prepared to say goodbye yet at all. It almost felt like any other lesson, and that I would be returning next week to teach something new. However, that sense of finality in the back of my mind slowly started to take over. We spent the lesson painting this beautiful collaborative piece right here. Although we had an amazing time making that painting, the lesson was focused less on the actual work and more on laughing, chatting, and joking around, making the most of the remaining time that we had. This lesson in particular stood out to me as my favorite lesson, simply because it showed the connections that had been made throughout the time that I had been there. It made it evident that art can bring people together and forge relationships through connection. There's a quote by Pablo Picasso which resonated with me a lot when I first heard it. It goes, "Art washes from the soul the dust of everyday life." Now, originally when I first heard this, I just thought this meant that art can make you feel better if you're having a crappy day. But hearing it a year later, after seeing how impactful just some weekly lessons can be, I realized it means so much more than that. Art can reach deeper inside of people than I could have ever imagined. However, it's not about the final piece. It's about the process and the journey, which is why these lessons meant so much to me, because they were spent shared with other people. If there was one word I could resonate with these children, without a doubt, it would be resilience. These children have been dealt a bad hand since birth and are still able to wake up every day and lighten up everyone else's days around them with their bright smiles and cheeky jokes. I hope that every single one of them have been impacted as much as I have from all of this. And most of all, I hope that I can return one day to continue teaching art lessons. Before I prepare to take my final bow, I want to ask you all one final question. What is the thing in life that you are most passionate about? If you're lucky, it's the job that you do every single day. Or it could be listening to your favorite music with headphones on full blast. It could even be catching an amazing wave at your local break. No matter what it is, imagine if you never discovered this thing that you care so much about. That is exactly why I made my Greenstone Canvas of Hope. Thank you.